Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to see you, and thank you for joining us today. I'd like to take a moment to introduce my incredible panel for today's conversation on the convergence of marketing, communications, and corporate reputation. So first with me, I have Chris Manzini, who's head of communications for PepsiCo. I have Chris Foster, CEO of Omnicom Public Relations Group, and Allison Stransky, Chief Marketing Officer at Samsung Electronics America. Thank you guys for joining me today. All right, yes, big round of applause, please. So we've been talking for years about marketing, communications, and reputation as separate functions. But stakeholders have never really seen it that way. And now with the collapse of channels, the advent of creators, scrutiny, technology, and expectations, these old lanes are not just being blurred, they're fully converging. So the real question is, how do leaders operate when every message, behavior, and stakeholder interaction is part of one unified system? So this conversation is about how we got here, what convergence looks like in practice, and what it means for the way organizations operate, measure impact, and lead. And so with that, I'd love to get to our first question, which is going to go to Chris here in the center.
Oh, lucky me.
I've always got to pick, someone's got to go first. What forces have collapsed marketing, communications, and reputation into one interconnected system? And was there a moment when you realized these old lanes were really converging?
So thank you. Thanks for having us here. Really appreciate it. And thanks to Brand Innovators for having me on the panel again. I'd say yes. The traditional gatekeepers are gone, right? And when you think about it, what lives and earned goes to social, what goes to paid and owned. And I think that's a dynamic that forces communicators and marketers to actually operate in real time across platforms, which is important. And I think, well, relative to, was there a moment when there was a shift? I think there were probably three moments if you look at over sort of the last 12 or 14 years. One, I think, the proliferation of social media completely changed how information moves. Change how we do brand and reputation strategy communications, change issues in crisis management. So that was one. When you see how that sort of changed the communication dynamic, I do think COVID, during and coming out of COVID, was a shift for us a bit. And then the attention we see today in the geopolitical space, I think represents another shift in the market.
That's great. I love that. I also want to add, I think, two other macro changes that have happened are, one, the change in measurement systems have also enabled us to put much more scrutiny on every piece of what we do in marketing. And I think performance marketing itself has changed the rest of marketing, because now that you've got one team that can say by the day, by whatever you want to pull, the efficiency and what's being returned, leadership is looking across everything else and saying, okay, they've raised the bar. How are you going to raise the bar? We've found that there's the most success when those teams work together, and they have to play off of each other because they're not going to all work if they all work in silos. So I think better measurement has raised the bar and pulled the whole organization together. And then two, I want to know what industry is having a killer banner year right now, but everybody is under so much pressure. I talked with a CEO of another very large holdco who said, normally when tech is down, CPG is up. Everyone's having a tough time right now.
Not this year. Yeah.
Tell us, CPG, how are you? So when we are all under incredible pressure too, I think there's no time for teams to not be working together, because the results, the demands, everything are more important than ever.
To be fair, I think in recent weeks we have seen an investor gravitational pull to CPG.
Yep.
As we've seen effect on software. Yeah, thank you. It's been a rough couple of years since joining PepsiCo. I guess two other factors, if we still want to maybe talk about things that are influencing this convergence. One, I think the way that culture is formed, I think has dramatically changed in the rise of the creator, and the way that culture is built through sort of non-paid or controlled mediums. I think gives people who are working in communications, who have expertise in getting other people to advocate and communicate on our behalf, a rising importance. And then on the more corporate stakeholder side, they're all just trying to understand like what's happening in the consumer space, and they're also consuming information the way consumers do, right? Like when we communicate with investors, it's not a dry white paper. We're communicating through listicles, right? So like everyone needs everyone's discipline to be able to effectively engage.
Can I just build off the culture thing? I'm really glad you mentioned culture, because I think there's also been a little bit of a shift that I've seen for the progressive marketers, right? Culture doesn't live in boardrooms and conference rooms. It lives in communities. And those progressive brands, like the both that you guys are, like are in communities, participating, interacting, and helping to shape culture. And I think that is a shift that's happened. And I think the progressive brands are taking advantage of it. So it's a really powerful comment.
So I just want to build off of that for a second with the idea of the co-creators, with the idea of, and look, we've been talking about who controls the brand for decades. But how do we think about the importance of the convergence of marketing, communications, and corporate reputation as a means of influencing that brand narrative when there are so many capable of creating a narrative on your behalf?
I mean, I think that the days of like decision rights or someone controlling is like done. I don't know about what your organization, but like, the way that we manage our corporate brand and reputation is through a cross-functional group that includes 5 executive committee members. It's head of corporate affairs, marketing, legal, sustainability, and our people function. And all of those functions have to be aligned for us to do anything. It's excruciating at times, but I think it leads to total alignment in terms of how our corporate brand shows up, certainly.
And when you said we've been talking for decades about who controls the brand, I think the consumer controls the brand. And that has become even more apparent now that everyone is a creator, or everyone can be a creator. You can't fully control anything. So all of these teams need to have a small piece and collectively support a very complicated world.
And I think that's been a challenge for marketers, right? I mean, like gone are the days, and for communicators, gone are the days where consumers are sitting back waiting for a product innovation or announcement. They want to participate in it. They have a point of view on it. And that's like a daily laboratory and feedback loop that brands are able to get every day on what's working, what's not working, which is why you have to sort of live in culture and community. But it's a really great point.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm not just here to ask questions, but I'm going to ask another question.
Oh, there you go.
So you mentioned, Chris, the committee that you guys have kind of brought together to help govern this convergence, this working relationship between these groups. And I'm curious, as these organizations have come together, where do you see these really just natural, beautiful moments of synergy and these challenging moments of friction as these groups come together and try and make decisions?
To be honest, I'm not sure we have either beauty or friction, right? I'm not like it's not contentious ever, and it's not really like this like wonderful kumbaya. It's more just like working through really hard stuff constantly. At PepsiCo, I mean, we are all incredibly lucky that our chairman and CEO has made reputation part of every executive committee member's PDR. So their personal, development plan has a reputation component in it based on their span of business. And so, I think everyone is looking to this group to guide and make recommendations and do things that sort of propels everyone's, everyone at the end of the year wants to have a successful PDR. The places where I think maybe we found it difficult is I think just the scale and complexity of our business. Everyone I think has a slightly different view on what's going to resonate. We're Pepsi is in the name. Everyone thinks we're a beverage company, but 60% of our business is actually food. So like, how do you do that? Should it be tied to agriculture? Should we be a snack company? Should we be a food company? Should we be emphasizing ingredients, moving away from ingredients? So there's like, it's just interesting debate to have because I don't think there is a single like good way. There's not a single right answer. So there's a lot of debate.
You go.
When convened to get together, I was not aware of how you structured it at Pepsi, and I think that is a really interesting way for an organization to pull those teams together to solve ongoing conversations like the ones you just listed, we, while not formally bringing those teams together, are finding that we're having more and more interaction. And in last year, 2025, we did a huge, for us, culture moment. We sponsored a Korean art exhibit at the Smithsonian Asian Art Museum in Washington, D.C. And this was, for us, one of those points in time where all of these teams converged to look at externally. We wanted this to be a celebration of Korean culture. Like, that is something that's very important to us. Running around, we're so proud of K-pop Demon Hunters at the Oscars. I like that. We've multiple people from Samsung posted about that on LinkedIn because we feel that the culture is such an important part of our business. We're having a moment right now. But when we saw teams come together and everybody played a role, from the policy team to comms to brand, put together a beautiful campaign around culture, and everybody had a seat at the table. And it was a moment when you said there was plenty of friction. It was hard. It was done in the backdrop of the government being shut down. The exhibition didn't even open on time. There were many, many roles for many, many teams. But at the end, we felt like it was a success. And I think part of it was because all of these stakeholders add important value.
I'm going to build on the friction thing, because I come at it from a different lens. You guys are both in-house, and I'm a consultant. So I come in, and I'm trying to sometimes move a process along. I think the friction comes in two places that I see. The first is it's balancing speed and risk, right? And I think so often as communicators, we feel the urgency of the speed. I've got to get out, I've got to get out, got to get out. And then when you get legal and you get compliance and HR, it feels like it just kind of gets a little, there are other considerations, right? So that is a friction point for sure that I see and we try to break. The second is, oftentimes, and I say this to my team and I see my team members in the room, is you've got to put the institution first, right? So when you're operating at speed and scale, it's less about what's good for my department and it's more about what's good for the enterprise. And that's another point of friction that gets really complicated. I'm sure you like a lot of head nodding. That's a real challenge. That's a real challenge.
Yeah, it sort of leads into the next question I wanted to ask, which is how are decisions getting made differently now than they were 2 or 3 years ago? And I think to your point, there are more people at the table. There are more viewpoints at the table. And so anyone want to kind of elaborate on, is there a different decision maker? Is there a different power broker in the conversation now than there was before?
So from what I see, so I think two things. And I don't think more people at the table means like better, right? Right? Because I think it can slow things down. But more voices need to be heard, I think, as more departments and divisions and functions, engage in the brand and reputation. Clarity on the ultimate decision maker is important. And I'm seeing more and more CEOs at a table with the sausage making. It used to be about let's just sort of package and sanitize and run a recommendation up. I think it's now a team sport. Oftentimes when you get into sort of this reputation risk and brand risk, and CEO is a new platform really these days that hasn't been in the past. I think that's an output also of COVID. So I think it's clarity in the decision making, which is not always there, because I think when you get lots of groups together, sometimes it's that group think and the committee thing. Ultimately, someone has to make a decision, and that's when you make a decision that's best for the enterprise.
To add to that, we are experiencing a similar shift with, I like the analogy of the CEO is in the sausage making, because that's what we are feeling right now, in that we're trying to, what is best for the business is not always linear, not always straightforward. So bring a lot of voices to the table. But then back to your question about what has changed in the last 2 to 3 years, we've always put the data out there to help us guide our decision. And there are many, many times that you don't have time to get the data. And so now you don't ever want to make marketing a purely gut sport, because it's the art and the science and all of it coming together. But the question of whether or not you have the data and the time to put all of that together has been another challenging dynamic that I think we're working through. In our case, we will try to bring the data as much as possible, or you will bring adjacent data that says, we think that we'll never get in a room and say, just tell me how you feel. But whether or not you have everything that you wished you had to make the decision is never that easy.
Maybe this is just, so I moved from agency life for 20 plus years to in-house 2 years ago. So I don't know if this is my change in role or something that's changed in the past 2 years, but I do think from a comms perspective, there is acceptance that our function is a convener now. And the fact that we live in this multi-stakeholder world and we have to look at issues and challenges from several different viewpoints. From a PepsiCo perspective, our products are in 98% of US homes. And so when we're doing decision-making, operating in a climate that it could be defined as polarizing, we're always having to say, okay, well, how can we meet the needs of those 98% of Americans? And comms, I think, plays an interesting role in surfacing up that data and facilitating that conversation to make decisions.
So we're going to take a little bit of a pivot and talk a little bit as corporate reputation and these things begin to converge. We obviously have moments and opportunities to speak up as a brand or to stay quiet as a brand. And oftentimes those decisions were made in vacuums with very small groups of people. Sounds like as now you guys expand the number of folks in the conversation. How do you decide when to speak up, stay quiet, or act quietly without fanfare?
So I think this is a big change that's happened at PepsiCo. We have a history of maybe a few missteps here and there. I remember Kendall Jenner, right? And I think that was like post George Floyd moment. Yep. We are, PepsiCo was formed 60 years ago through the merger of Pepsi and Frito-Lay. And we have all of these brands, and we operate in 200 markets around the world. We were like pockets of teams loosely connected through a holding company. And that was the way the company intentionally operated. And so you had these like brand marketers or communication people who were just sort of like, they were running their play, right? Like maybe there was some oversight, but not much. Now we have like robust integration to make sure that the organization isn't, like teams aren't going out and making commitments. We saw this through creator. We talk about a lot creator engagement, right? The amount of like vetting and monitoring of creators to make sure that they align with brand values. We recently had to restate our climate change goals, this year. And I think so there's a lot, we put a lot of work into making sure that the actions of the company are matched to our North Star and not sort of like reacting to the moment.
It's I think it's a question that we ask ourselves constantly. Do you speak? Do you not speak? I think the answer to that question is also found a lot in the circumstances. And so there would not be a one size fits all answer for anything. Sometimes moments are moving so fast that by the time you get yourself together, like it's gone. So, and a lot of those are great positive moments that you want to jump on a trend. And I think of other great brand examples who had the systems and the processes in place to leverage those things in advance, and kudos to all of those organizations. But we are always kind of at the Samsung brand is precious. It's an honor to be able to work here and to protect the business. And so if we think of that, sometimes we're more comfortable missing an opportunity because you're better off not doing it the wrong way. Better not doing it than doing it the wrong way. And so we do, I'm okay that we give things a lot of thought and we give things a lot of assessment because we're not small and nimble. I'll tell you that.
And I think brands should take time, right? And I think we should not feel as much pressure. One of the things I challenge, sort of my clients to think about when it's a moment where they feel compelled to speak is the communications operational or is it rhetorical, right? And because, the authenticity lives in the follow-up. So if it's operational, I'm going to make a comment on an issue or something that's happening in society, and I'm going to do something about it, or I'm going to change something. It's the difference between actually, closing that say-do gap and doing something, or sort of offering thoughts and prayers. Yeah, right? It's performative. So, when you really sit and talk to a team about that, ask that question as bluntly, the answer becomes really, really clear. Well, as a brand, we don't really have, this is not our jam. So we're probably going to go a different direction, or we're going to maybe remain silent. Right. So I think there is something around the operational versus rhetorical that does help get clarity in the decision making.
All right. Well, thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit about how this convergence actually works in practice. So we talked about bringing together different groups, bringing together governance, bringing together corporate reputation, communications, marketing, all into one. But when governance or decision-making models, or what governance or decision-making models have you seen really work in practice in terms of how you bring people together, where you bring them together, when you bring them together to solve these problems or to address these opportunities?
I think in our case, it's never early enough to start bringing teams together. Even when you sit down at the briefing, somebody comes to me and says, I wasn't there early enough because I didn't write the brief. So there's never an opportunity. There's no way to start it too early. There's never, not that I want to advocate for meetings on meetings, but like the teams working cross-functionally need to continuously touch base too. So when I think of successful examples, they're more together on the early side because I know that our teams have thoughts and perspectives. And when hear it all the time, brand thinks they're doing something small and little and they just went and did it. And then comms calls and it's like, I could have made that so much bigger if you just told me that was happening. So I think that you're feeling that too. So I think the more we can do together earlier is going to be better.
And I think I totally subscribe to the early and often. I have a comment on data, but also, I think the scenario planning together, right? Because I think one of the things is, as we go back to the very first question, the lanes are blurring, right? The lanes are blurring between marketing and comms and PR, where there are more voices at the table. So we're also going to interrogate and diagnose problems differently. We're going to see risk differently. So if we're doing that on the clock in real time, under the pressure we're going to make mistakes, right? But if we're actually doing that and we're starting to engage in these conversations, I have a lens into your thinking as a comms person and you as a marketer, it's going to be a little different. I also think it's the data. We have to democratize the data differently. And here's what I mean by that. So Kristen, in your function, you have a lot of data that you get regularly and tracking on reputation and the reputation drivers and on the effectiveness of comms. And you use similarly on the marketing side, which is about growth and sales and market share. Those data sets have to talk to each other.
Yep.
And part of so and it's when they talk to each other, we use data differently, right? We're not using data to answer questions. We need to use data to figure out what questions we should be asking. And if marketing and comms and legal are together interacting with data early and often, then it really changes the consideration set in a crisis or in a situation where we're trying to move earlier. So I would argue that some of the more progressive brands are thinking about the use of data differently and integrating data in a much more continuous time frame, which I think is absolutely necessary.
I spoke about a little bit of our governance. I guess rather than repeat that, I'll maybe share 3 rituals that we practice in our function that I think helps with not the governance of structure, but creates a better cross-functional environment. One is starting every meeting with a check-in. So it breaks down, I'm showing up as the marketing representative and you realize that Sam was up all night with his kid, right? It's and so seeing each other as humans, not as in our role, I think is hugely important because ultimately we need to get out of our role and we need to connect as humans to be able to discuss and debate and have that psychological safety to unpack and solve something together. The second is the value of a pre-mortem. So getting people together to be what's going to go wrong? And the thing that might go wrong might be oh, well, marketing wasn't involved. So you'll spot that in advance.
Yep.
And the second is a postmortem because nothing hides mistakes like success. So if you can, after a successful program, get together and go, what went wrong? You won't repeat the mistake next time.
And you know who's the best at all of those is the reputation team because they're the ones that see everything that's coming before it comes.
Yeah, that's great.
So I have this next question, and it bears the promise of repetition. But again, as a comms person, I believe in repetition.
Good.
So what capability or discipline do you think organizations consistently under-invest in as we bring Convergence together?
PR agencies?
Yeah, I'd say PR agencies for sure. Yeah.
No, I think, look, as a comms team at PepsiCo right now, we are looking at where the company is making an investment in our function. And the place where I think we have gaps is probably in the investment of always on storytelling at the moment. And I say that for two reasons. One, we're really good at the big moments, right? We land quarterly earnings, we pull big brand announcements into that, and like we kill it. In the big moments, we sort of focus on like the next event. And we have to create more engagement in the valleys. The second is with AI and large language models, we now need to be producing enough content for machines.
Yes.
Not just for people to consume, and the machines can consume a lot of content. So how do we just increase the production of the comms function is I think our biggest opportunity.
Well,
I agree, and the content's different.
Yes.
Right? It's not a jingle or a slogan. I mean, it's facts and figures, and it's got to be different. So I think I agree with you. I would say broadly as a discipline, I do think PR oftentimes is underinvested in. It is what it is, but that's the answer to the question. But within that, I agree with Chris. I'd say it's the content engine and that newsroom mentality, right? We're almost coming back to that, just given how greedy the algorithms are for information, and an individual, you can't satisfy it in real time in tentpole moments. You have to create sort of this newsroom mentality where you're producing your own content daily, which means I need different messengers. I need this consistency of messaging. I need to recruit much more of your executive team or your executive team to actually help me in that content game.
And I guarantee you all have stakeholders in your organization who are looking for always on content. Please shut down always on, because
please.
It's impossible. Like,
Can that
no
be
one
the
can
pull
be always
quote
on.
for this panel?
I love that. No, I today we're going to cancel always on. But everything that you said is 100% true. And I was going to say the same thing, is that investing in storytelling, because you can't possibly have enough of it. But I think the way that our organizations have also often become wired, at least internally in our case, that's not where we're putting the storytellers. Right. We're leaning on agencies, we're leaning on creators, we're expecting that a brief is going to deliver amazing results, but we need content and storytelling from everything all the time.
The wildest thing I'm going to say on that, and I would have 2 years ago, I never would have said it. I would have sort of it would have been embarrassing. I think the corporate website's making a comeback.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's
LLMs love corporate
websites.
websites.
I mean that's a destination for content.
And then there is a layer of, now we are trying to get ready to understand what the LLMs need. So here comes the era of GEO on top of everything else that we were already doing. So my search person, which I'm reminded all the time is a person, is responsible for buying search, tracking search, optimizing search, plus SEO, plus GEO. And that GEO is going to feed everything else from a comms and a brand and everything storytelling. So we're building that ship, that plane, whatever that is, while we're flying it, driving it. But I think it's a really exciting tipping point. But whoa, we just doubled the amount of work without truly doubling the people.
And thinking about how you balance the authenticity of that content as you build for a human audience and a robot audience. And how that balance gets struck. So we do have ROI in the title of our panel. So I do think we should talk for a few moments about some metrics. And what I'd love to start with is, what traditional metrics are losing relevance in this converged world? What could we let go of?
Impressions.
Thank you. Yeah.
No, I agree. Impressions just sort of frustrate me. But look, at the end of the day, from where I sit, 98% of the clients we work with are trying to sell something, right? So whether an idea, a product, a service, so it's growth. Like, growth needs to be at the center of what we do as comms and marketers. And I do think, this is one thing that frustrates me a lot on the PR side of the house, is the work we do does directly impact, growth and or market share. There's not as much appreciation of that, and we don't demonstrate it as often as we should, but I think that's what we should lean into. But I'd say growth, lose impressions and all that other stuff, but I lean into growth and sales metrics.
We're consistently trying to evaluate the KPIs, reinvent the KPIs, make sure we're all managing the same KPIs. There's so many things, the conversations that we're having. I think it's a balance of the short term and the long term, but I also feel that we're putting more pressure on the PR and comms space than ever before. I will acknowledge it. We're asking for more return faster. And therefore, that is actually an area that's really rich for KPI improvement, because we've moved on from volume of articles. Volume does not mean anything. And now we're at, okay, tell me exactly. So, okay, now now it's quality. Now we have a quality score. Now what is the next evolution beyond that that connects it all together? So I'm still looking for that unicorn of a KPI in the PR space that gets us to how PR drives growth, but we feel the value, so we're on the journey to make sure it is valued and measured accordingly.
So from either of the comms people, do you have that unicorn metric?
I don't think we have it yet.
Yeah.
Well, I started to explore a few years ago return on engagement, right? Because so much of what we're involved in it's the battle for attention. And this is when I was in the management consulting space. I really wanted to, is there a way for us to quantify what engagement brings us or buys us? It was probably early back then, but I think now we could get pretty close, right? To like, what does that mean on a specific campaign or a program or against a brand driver or reputation driver? I think we need to lean into that a little differently because the attention battle's real, and we're focused on that.
I'm a big fan of just being honest about the operating environment. And so that requires both really sophisticated KPIs where we're looking at the impact that we have on search and AI engines. But then also like, if your executive really likes the New York Times, put in a goal that you're going to have a story in the New York Times. Like just call it what it is. And I think by being honest.
We love those briefs, by the way, in the PR center.
So, so have high tech.
Love the New York Times.
Nobody wants that metric.
But Chris is right. It's real. I mean, sometimes you have to earn.
I know where the budget comes from.
But
Yeah.
yes. All right. If you could, how will organizations measure the impact of narrative behavior alignment in the future? So you talked a little bit about these sort of measurements of engagement. What are the other things that we should be looking at or thinking about when we consider the strength of the narrative and the influence of the narrative in the marketplace? Well,
I mean, it's in community, right? It's and with reputation, there's an ongoing feedback loop on the narrative. Like, is it working? Is it resonating? And I could measure that. I could see that with how consumers are interacting with my content, how they're sharing my content, how they're forwarding my content, how they're building on my content. So I think we've got to pay attention to the regular feedback loop that's happening daily. With the narrative and the messaging we're putting out. Because again, it's not ours, it's shared and it's co-created. So I do think we need to probably do a better job in quantifying that, but all the tools are in place and the systems and platforms are in place for us to measure that feedback loop.
I think the narrative's holding us back. Like, how many of you worked on these beautiful narratives that then, like, where do you ever see that actually told the way that you wrote it? Like, it never shows up. And with the volume of stories that we need to be able to generate to engage the number of consumers or other stakeholders we get, I think we need like thousands of like little stories and like little data points and like empower people and become the kindling of like, for people to tell other stories. I think I try not to over-rotate on having the perfect narrative, I guess is my point. Is that like, what are the components of the story? And then how do you equip people to go out and tell stories on their own and not try to control it and like craft the perfect narrative?
We're still thinking a lot about the narrative. In tech, where we've been thinking about is we've been so feature-led for so long in our storytelling. And I'll admit that not just our products have gotten so good, but our competitive products have gotten so good. Tech has become this incredible journey where your products are better and the cost adjustment of what they are, they're less expensive than ever before, especially TVs. So what are we delivering that is more than features and specs? That's the new narrative that we're trying to get out there, but that's the find all the places to tell that story is really important.
Is that hard? Because Chris said something that's interesting. It's like you've got the 10-pole moments, and in your case, those are the next X, the next Y innovation. Is it hard to fill the space in between the launches and the innovation for you in the tech space?
That's where we've been laser focused for the last year plus.
Okay.
That has been and honestly, that's a shift that I think we've felt on my team, but have finally gotten alignment from the top that is important. And that case has been made by partially due to the LLMs. They don't only want launches, partially due to, you can look at the business and say, everything we know about our consumers' shopping timelines, I love the number of people who order their phones before the phone comes out
Right.
Not everybody does that. You're not ready for it. Also, you have full of duress purchases. The majority of appliance purchases happen because your appliance broke, and I cannot align your appliance breaking to my tent pole. So but if it happens, I'm sorry that happened, but also thank you. So all of those things, we are really seeing the value and the importance of the always on, but then that always on narrative is a full mix of, I need you to be able to say, this is the power of 200 megapixel camera, and this is why it's great that our phone does blah, blah, blah. But also, we're trying to elevate it with our AI for all narrative and how the products are better when they work together, because I think those are all important moments that are not necessarily tentpole launch based, but the things that drive consideration and purchase across a normal consumer shopping cycle and decision-making journey.
So I have, in closing, a lightning round. One question for each of you. What principles should guide organizations as they navigate this convergence over the next year? Just one.
Consumers. Wait, are we doing lightning round with one word, or do you want elaboration? We didn't align on this.
No, I can't do one word.
You can do a phrase, you can do a sentence, you can do a word.
I think the consumer will always be the most important for a brand person, so as long as they are North Star and our beacon, and we are thinking about what is right for them. Here is my 5-paragraph essay when you said a phrase. I think that will be the thing that drives us as an enterprise as well.
Fantastic.
I'd say transparency, right? As organizations, say what you mean to mean what you say. It is a very discerning consumer marketplace out there, and rhetoric oftentimes gets us in trouble. So make sure when you say things, you mean them, and you're going to act on them.
I would say similar, clarity of audience, just like know who really matters and align what you're doing, what you believe, how you operate, the products you serve to their needs.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you all each for your candor, for your insights and perspective today. It's definitely been illuminating, and I feel great about giving up impressions. I feel like that should be the headline from this entire panel. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you.